So, hello, welcome back. I hope your mouth is still watering from the chili fries because we are still talking about the digestive system. In this section, we'll be taking up the development of the stomach and the development of the esophagus. So, let's just get into it. These are the foregut derivatives. We talked about it before, the foregut. This in yellow is the foregut. This foregut forms the abdominal part of the esophagus and also the stomach. Now we'll see how this development actually takes place. So, esophagus develops from the part of foregut that lies between the pharynx and the stomach. So, cranially we have pharynx and caudally towards the feet we have the stomach. In between this we have the esophagus. So, ventrally at the pharyngeoesophageal junction, we see a laryngotracheal groove. So this is the foregut tube, and it gives off a median laryngotracheal groove. So what is a laryngotracheal groove? It will form the adult larynx as well as the trachea. Now this groove or this bulge, it moves forward. It is growing forward and caudally. Here you can see the caudal growth. This is the caudal growth, and this forms the tracheobronchial diverticulum. So initially this was a laryngotracheal groove. This laryngotracheal groove then grew forward as well as caudally to form the tracheobronchial diverticulum. This tracheobronchial diverticulum, it grows further to form the trachea, and between the trachea and this forming foregut tube, there's a septum which is known as the tracheoesophageal septum. This tracheoesophageal septum separates the developing foregut tube into a ventral and a dorsal portion. Ventrally we have the adult trachea and dorsally we have the adult esophagus. So the foregut tube actually forms a small outpouching. This outpouching then grows caudally and increases in size to form the adult trachea. Then there's a tracheoesophageal septum, and distally we have the adult esophagus. So in the figure, this is the growing tracheoesophageal septum in yellow. This was the initial bud or the groove that was given off from the foregut. This groove then expanded in size and tended to grow caudally. Now it was called the tracheobronchial diverticulum. This is the septum in between the trachea and the future esophagus. Here you can see this is the developing trachea, this is the developing esophagus, and in between in yellow is the tracheoesophageal septum. And finally, when this adult structure, the tracheoesophageal septum, is formed completely, it separates the trachea which lies ventrally and the esophagus which lies dorsally. So now esophagus. So initially esophagus is a small segment, but how does it increase in its length? So what happens? There's formation of neck. So this neck tissue is formed. This forms and elongates. Now there's descent of the diaphragm. So diaphragm, after being formed, it descends into the thoracic cavity, and along with it goes the esophagus. And there is descent of the heart and lungs. So the lungs are rapidly expanding, the heart is being formed. All of these descent along with the formation of the diaphragm. These three factors, the formation of neck, the descent of diaphragm, and the descent of heart and the lungs, they act as a mechanical stimulus for the esophagus, and as a result of that there's pulling of esophagus downwards, and which causes the elongation of the esophageal tube. So initially this esophageal tube, the lumen of the tube is obliterated by the rapidly expanding, the rapidly proliferating cells. However, these rapidly proliferating cells then are recanalized and the lumen is again formed, and then the adult esophagus appears. So now we'll talk about the three sections of the esophagus. The esophagus can be divided into three sections depending on the muscles that lie within the esophagus. In the upper 1/3 we have the striated muscles. In the middle 2/3 we have in the middle 1/3 we have the striated and the smooth muscles, and in the lower 1/3 that is adjacent to the stomach we only have the smooth muscles. So the lining epithelium of the esophagus is derived from the endoderm of the foregut, and the muscular and the connective tissue are derived from the splanchnic mesenchyme which surrounds the foregut. So now we'll talk about the development of the stomach. So stomach actually begins developing as a dilation in the gut, in the foregut tube. So these are the fusiform dilations, that is they form initially they're small dilations and then they fuse with each other to form a bigger dilation. Of this happens in the foregut distal to esophagus in the 4th week of the intrauterine life. So this dilatation has a ventral border. This ventral border gives attachment to the ventral mesentery. Then it also has a dorsal border. So for the sake of understanding again, this is the dorsal surface, this is the ventral surface. Dorsal surface lies towards the back, that is towards the vertebral column, and the ventral surface lies in the front, that is towards the anterior abdominal wall. So the dorsal border of this dilatation, it gives attachment to the dorsal mesentery. Then moving on, it also has a left surface and a right surface and an upper and a lower end. So now, how does the adult shape and position of the stomach is attained? So if you see in this figure, this is the longitudinal axis of the stomach. So stomach actually, there's growth in this fusiform tube. This is the fusiform tube, this dilated portion. There's more growth on the anterior end as compared to the posterior end, as a result of which the anterior end expands more. So it expands more towards the right, and the greater curvature of the stomach is formed due to rapid proliferation of cells on the anterior border. There is a lesser proliferation of cells on the posterior border, as a result of which there is some formation of curvature. This is the lesser curvature, since it does not expand as much as the greater curvature of the stomach. So this is how the greater curvature is formed, by rapid proliferation of cells on the anterior border. The posterior border follows the anterior border, however, much slowly. This results in the formation of lesser curvature. Now there are two types of rotations that occur within this developing stomach tube to form the adult stomach. One rotation is along the longitudinal axis, which lies along the two openings, the upper end and the lower end. If both of them are aligned, this form the longitudinal axis of the stomach. So first rotation is along the longitudinal axis, which spins the stomach upon itself. Here if you see, this is the left vagus nerve, this is the right vagus nerve, and now they are spinning around the longitudinal axis, as a result of which this left vagus nerve comes to lie on the anterior surface, and the right vagus nerve, it comes to lie on the posterior surface. Now there's another rotation that takes place. This is the anterior posterior axis rotation. This is the anterior posterior axis of the stomach. The anterior posterior rotation results in the tilting of the cardiac end towards the right. Here you can see the cardiac end is tilted towards the right due to anterior posterior rotation of the stomach, and the pyloric end, it moves towards the left side of the body. And this is the adult position of the stomach. So recapping this slide, we talked about the changes in the shape and the position of the stomach. So how does this dilatation forms the adult stomach? There's a rapid proliferation of the cells on the anterior surface and the posterior surface. The cells on the anterior surface, they are dividing rapidly, way more rapidly than that of the posterior surface. As a result, There's formation of greater curvature. Here you can see in the figure the formation of greater curvature along the anterior aspect of the stomach, and there's formation of lesser curvature because on the posterior aspect, because the cells on the posterior aspect, they are proliferating rapidly, but not as rapidly as those on the anterior surface. Now we saw the rotations in the stomach. There are two types of rotation: the rotation along the longitudinal axis and the rotation along the anterior posterior axis. So what is the longitudinal axis? Longitudinal axis is if the tubular stomach is lined so that its opening and both the openings, the upper end and the lower end, they come to lie in the longitudinal section. So this is the longitudinal axis of the stomach. It causes spinning of the stomach around the longitudinal axis, as a result of which the left vagus nerve, it comes to lie on the right, and the right vagus nerve, it comes to lie on the posterior surface. So now the left vagus nerve forms a plexus on the anterior surface of the stomach, and the right vagus nerve, it forms the plexus on the posterior surface of the stomach. Now there's another rotation that occurs in the stomach. This rotation is along the anteroposterior axis. As a result of this rotation, the stomach, it tilts slightly within the longitudinal axis. Now the cardiac end of the stomach, it moves to the right, and the pyloric end, it moves to the left. Here you can see this is the adult position of the stomach within the human body. So moving on, we'll see how there are changes in the mesentery of the stomach. So there's ventral mesogastrium. Here you can see in the figure, which extends from the lesser curvature of the stomach to the anterior abdominal wall and the septum transversum. Then we have the dorsal mesogastrium, which extends from the greater curvature of the stomach into the posterior abdominal wall. Now, what happens? So there is development of liver in the septum transversum, and as a result, the ventral mesogastrium, now it divides into two parts. So that extending from the stomach to the liver is known as the lesser omentum. This is the lesser omentum that is extending from the lesser curvature of the stomach to the liver. This is the lesser omentum, and extending between the liver, this is the liver, and the anterior abdominal wall forms a falciform ligament of the liver. So this is a falciform ligament of the liver, which extends from liver to the anterior abdominal wall, and the part of the ventral mesogastrium, which is extending from the lesser curvature of the stomach to the liver, is known as the lesser omentum. Now, there's development of spleen within the dorsal mesogastrium, as a result of which the dorsal mesogastrium also divides into two parts. These two parts are the first part is the gastrophrenic ligament. The gastrophrenic ligament is gastrosplenic ligament. The gastrosplenic ligament is extending from the greater curvature of the stomach to the spleen. This is the gastrosplenic ligament. And now, extending from spleen to the posterior abdominal wall, we have the lineorenal ligament. So what happens? There's formation of adult glandular structures within these ventral and dorsal mesogastriums. This divide the dorsal and ventral mesogastriums into two parts. The two parts of the ventral mesogastrium are the lesser sac and lesser omentum and the falciform ligament of the liver. The two parts of the dorsal mesogastrium are the gastrosplenic ligament and the lineorenal ligament. So moving on, the dorsal mesogastrium attached to the rest of the greater curvature. Now we are talking about this portion, the dorsal mesogastrium, which is attached to the rest of the greater curvature. It elongates and forms a large apron-like fold which folds upon itself. This is a fold of peritoneum and it is known as the greater omentum. So greater omentum is an apron-like fold which is attached to the greater curvature of the stomach. This is the greater curvature, and it covers the intestinal parts, the intestinal organs. All of the intestines are covered by the this greater curvature, this omentum, the greater omentum. So the rotation of stomach along its axis, we talked about the two rotations, the longitudinal and the anteroposterior, pulls the dorsal mesogastrium to the left, creating a space behind the stomach which is known as the lesser sac. So this rotation of the stomach, the two rotations which were the longitudinal rotation and the anteroposterior rotation, they pull this omentum to the left slightly, and as a result of which there is opening in the omentum which lies behind this stomach, which is known as the lesser sac of the peritoneum or the omental bursa. So histogenesis. So epithelial cells which epithelium which is lining the stomach and the gastric glands, they are formed by the endoderm of the primitive foregut. We talked about this before. The endoderm of the foregut forms the endodermal components of the adult gut. Now the musculae and the serous cord, they are formed by the splanchnic intra-embryonic mesoderm which surrounds this developing foregut. Now we have the gastric glands. These glands appear in the 3rd month of intrauterine life and start their function. Now the oxyntic cells and zymosin cells, these are two specific kinds of cells that have specific function within the human stomach. You must be knowing them. They appear in the 4th month of development. Both these cells and the gastric glands are very important for the normal development of the stomach. So in this section, we talked about the development of esophagus and the development of stomach. We saw how a simple foregut tube was divided into a ventral trachea and a dorsal esophagus. Then we saw the formation of dilations within this foregut tube. These dilations were distal to the esophagus. Then the fusiformed underwent, they formed the greater curvature and the lesser curvature of the stomach. They underwent two different rotations, the longitudinal rotation and the anteroposterior rotation, which resulted in the formation of adult stomach. I hope you understood it. For further sections, keep watching sqadia.com.